Hello, my dears. This is Annette of AnnetteLeonard.com. Welcome back. Once again, we are continuing the conversation about how did I get diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so, after limping along in utter dismay and distress for about 6 months, my doctor then referred me to an infectious disease specialist. And I am so fortunate that my physician not only had experience with chronic fatigue syndrome, but just believed and trusted me, made time for me, and worked with me, and was willing to do blood work and make referrals and consider diagnoses that were outside of just the standard codex of what one could test for and prove out with a medical test. So what's true about chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia is that they are diagnoses of exclusion. You only arrive at them by knocking out what else they might be and then honing in on preponderance of evidence and what symptoms remain. And so it's not that you can run a blood test to say this is chronic fatigue syndrome or this is fibromyalgia. And so I think for that reason, there are lots of doctors who are pretty wary of the diagnosis or pretty hesitant to acknowledge those diagnoses. And I think a lot of people are dismissed and are not diagnosed for those reasons. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate that I had a physician who not only had experience with chronic fatigue syndrome, but another patient who had gone before me and had had a chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis. And so I already had this wellspring of belief and precedence on my side. And that turned out to be unimaginably helpful. So at 6 months, when I was not better, she referred me to an infectious disease specialist. And we did whole batteries of tests. And the infectious disease specialist was the first real in-depth specialist that I'd ever met with. And he spent an hour and a half with me talking through my medical history, both my sort of life and background, where I'd lived, all the things that I'd done in my life, what things I'd been exposed to, and then also my family medical background. And he built a framework, I guess, about who I was, what I'd likely been exposed to, and combined that then with all the tests and scans that he was ordering. And at the end of probably 6 weeks, maybe, after having gotten in with him, he determined that my initial monodiagnosis had been Epstein Bar Virus. Evidently, mono can be actually one of 3 viruses that you're exposed to. And mine had been Epstein Bar. And he said, you've not gotten over this initial exposure to Epstein Bar virus. And so there is no DSM diagnosis for chronic Epstein Bar virus, but that is essentially what you now have. And the only recognized diagnosis that we have that matches your symptoms is chronic fatigue syndrome. More on that in the next little clip. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing this time with me. And until we're together again, be well.